turn to Proverbs 8:24. This is still wisdom speaking here. And she says, "When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water." So let's look at that first part. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. Of course, I in this passage refers to wisdom personified, as we've seen repeatedly. So let's look at that first part there. When there were no depths. A depth is something that is deep. See, you learn something every day, don't you? I know I had to really just sit back and ponder and consider that. Yeah, it was too much for this small mind to conceive. Something that is deep. It is a deep water, a deep part of the sea, of any body of water, or of any body of water. Usually in the plural, and that's how it's used here, when there were no depths, plural. In the plural, it's now only poetic and rhetorical, and then it means the great abyss of waters, the deep. And then for that definition, it cites Proverbs 8:27, which we'll get to here in maybe a week or two, when it says, when he set a compass upon the face of the depth. So when he talks about the depths, he's talking about the seas and the oceans. And I'll give you a few verses here which will establish that. In Exodus 15:4 through 5. Exodus 15:4 through 5. It says, "And Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. His chosen captains are drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank into the bottom as a stone." They're cast into the sea. The depths have covered them. So what are the depths? The sea. Look at verse 8. "And with the blast of thy nostrils the waters were gathered together. The flood stood upright as an heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the sea." So there you have two witnesses, and I'll give you another one. Psalm 77, verse 16. This passage in Proverbs 8 is interesting because she basically goes through the whole creation account pretty well from the beginning in order, goes through most of it, and is telling us that she was there the whole time. She was there as God was creating through each day, the different things he was creating. She was there, and he was using her to do it. Psalm 77 and verse 16. It says, "The waters saw thee, O God, the waters saw thee, they were afraid, the depths also were troubled." So the depths of the waters. And I'll give you one more. Isaiah 51 and verse 10. This is the best way to understand the Bible, is to compare spiritual things with spiritual. That's how you understand what a passage is talking about. Isaiah 51 and verse 10 says, "Art thou not it that hath dried the sea, the waters of the great deep, that hath made the depths of the sea a way for the ransom to pass over?" So the sea, and in the Bible, oceans are referred to as seas. I don't believe the word ocean is used in the Bible. I'm almost positive it's not. But like when it talks about the Great Sea, it's talking about the Mediterranean, which is actually part of the ocean. If you trace it back, over across Africa, you get out there to the Atlantic Ocean. So when it's talking about the seas and the great deeps, it could be talking about seas like the Red Sea or the Sea of Galilee, or it could be talking about oceans as well. So God created the depths on the first day of creation. It was one of the first things he created. Genesis 1 through 2. Genesis 1 through 2. "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." So when God created the heaven and the earth, he just had the earth, and it was completely covered in water, and the heavens, singular. He hadn't yet made the atmosphere and outer space. It was just space around the earth. That was the heaven, and then he divided it out into the first and second heaven in the subsequent days of creation. So he had here this earth with this ocean the whole way around it, this deep ocean. That's the depths. There were no depths prior to the first day of creation, right? Prior to the first day of creation, there was no heaven, there was no earth. I mean, heaven in the sense of the outer space and the atmosphere. There's no earth, there's no ocean, there's no anything. So it makes sense for wisdom to say, before the creation of the world, she was brought forth. Before the depths, she was brought forth. It's a way of saying she was around before God started to create, because the depths were the first thing he created. She says she was brought forth. To find the definition of brought forth, you have to go to the verb bring, and then you go down to number 16, and you see the phrase bring forth. To bring forth means to produce, give birth to, bring into being, bear, yield, and that could be offspring, fruit, flowers, etc., natural products, effects, results. That's not what this is referring to. Wisdom was not given birth to or something, or brought into creation like a fruit or offspring or something. It also means, this is still part of this definition of bring forth, to utter, express, to put forth, adduce, advance. And it also means to bring to light or public view. And that is the sense in which this is speaking of here. When wisdom was brought forth, she was brought into light and public view. And I'll give you 3-4 verses which will show that to bring forth or brought forth means to bring into light, into public view. First of all, I'll give you Leviticus 24 and verse 14. So dictionaries are important to understand the Word of God, but then sometimes the dictionary will give you a definition, and maybe even the primary definition has different applications of the definition, or in some cases you even use a secondary definition, but you use the Bible to determine which definition is or which part of the definition is the correct part, and that's what I'm doing right here. Leviticus 24 and verse 14 says, "Bring forth him that hath cursed without the camp, and let all that heard him lay their hands upon his head, and let all the congregation stone him." So this is a guy that cursed, and what were they to do? Bring him forth. Now the Lord wasn't telling his parents to go ahead and birth him, right? Obviously that's not what he was referring to. Bring him forth. Bring him to light. Bring him out so everybody can see him. Reveal him, right? That's what to bring forth means. When wisdom says, "I was brought forth," that's what it's talking about, bringing her into light, into view. Let's look at Joshua 2 and verse 3. Joshua 2 and verse 3. It says, "And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab," you remember Rahab the harlot when the spies went into Jericho, and they turned into her house and she hid them from the authorities. "The king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they be come to search out all the country." He says, bring forth. Bring them to light. Bring them out so we can see them. Bring them into public view, in other words. This is what wisdom is saying when God brought her forth. God didn't give birth to her. He didn't create her. He brought her forth. He brought her into public view. Look at Genesis 14 and verse 18. Genesis 14, 18. I'm belaboring this point just a little bit because all these verses set up and bring forth, and these words and phrases are used to try to prove the eternal generation of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And I'm just showing that that's not what this is referring to. Genesis 14:18. "In Melchizedek," you remember Melchizedek, that's where Jesus got his priesthood from. "In Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God." He brought it into view. It obviously already existed. He just brought it so everybody could see it, right? He showed it to them and then gave it to them to eat and drink. I'll give you one more. Genesis 24 and verse 53. Genesis 24:53. "And the servant brought forth jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment, and gave them to Rebekah. And he He gave also to her brother and to her mother precious things. So he didn't create the jewels. He just pulled them out where everybody could see them. Okay, so I think I made the point pretty well here. So the question would be, why did God bring forth wisdom before he created the world? Because she says before the, how did she say it there? Before the depths? When there were no depths, I was brought forth. Well, why did he bring her forth before the depths were created? It's because he used wisdom to create the world. I'll give you a few verses here. Psalm 136 and verse 5. And then I'll give you a real little practical nugget here, which will make this make perfect sense to you. Especially Austin, because it'll be a application that you're familiar with. Psalm 136 and verse 5. If I can ever get there. Psalm 136:5 says, "To him that by wisdom made the heavens, for his mercy endureth forever." Remember what we read there? Genesis 1:1. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. How did he do it? By wisdom hath made the heavens. Right? Before the depths, I was brought forth, wisdom says. She was brought forth to create the heavens and the earth and the depths. Proverbs 3 and verse 19. We've looked at this verse a time or two. Proverbs 3:19 says, "The Lord by wisdom hath founded the earth, and by understanding hath he established the heavens." That lines up so well there with Genesis 1:1. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Right there's how he did it, through wisdom. And I'll give you one more. Jeremiah 10 and verse 12. It says, "He hath made the earth by his power, he hath established the world by his wisdom, and hath stretched out the heavens by his discretion." So God brought forth his wisdom before he began creating for the same reason that you would bring forth your blueprints before you started to build a house, right? You wouldn't start to build a house before you brought forth the blueprints and took a look at them, right? Or made the blueprints, for that matter, right? Well, it's the same reason. God wasn't going to just start to create without, first of all, bringing forth wisdom to be able to figure out the best way to do it. Because remember what it is to be wise. It's to find the best means to accomplish a proposed end. God wanted to create a universe and an earth and the depths. And he brings forth wisdom to help him out. That's how he did it. If you think about it, it would take an infinite amount of wisdom to conceive, design, and fabricate the heavens, the earth, and all that's in them. It would take a lot of wisdom to do that. Hence the reason that God brought forth wisdom before he began creating. There's some people, a lot of people probably, that before they ever start on a project, they don't want to draw anything out. They don't want to plan anything out. They just want to get started. You ever met people like that? I just want to get started. And don't make no plans, make no drawings, nothing. And building projects like that usually probably end badly, I would think. Unless you're a very skilled person or something and the whole plan's already in your head. But not a good idea to just start digging a hole to lay a foundation before you've really planned anything out and done some measurements, right?
There wasn't anything on paper when that happened.
Really? It was all in your head?
Yeah.
Well, you brought forth wisdom instead of the blueprints.
Well, he has skills. He's an
Yeah.
expert already.
That's true.
He's an expert. It's all his I have
Well, thankfully I covered my butt because I said, or you have it in your head.
Yeah.
Because our deck, nothing on paper.
I
Really?
was just going to keep my mouth shut.
He was just going to go with it.
My dad did that too, and he built a piece under the house that I was born in, and it was a big piece, like 16 by 40, 2 stories high with a basement. It was and he didn't have anything drawn out. He had it all in his head, and he hired somebody to help him, some carpenter. And I think about it drove the guy nuts because he's like, "No, I don't have anything in my head. I can tell you exactly what it needs to be," and it did. It turned out fine. He had it all in his head.
Probably the complexity of what you're wanting is going to play into that a lot too. Like if I was building a house for me, I don't think I need a blueprint.
Really?
Because it'd be a very simple house.
Yeah.
If I'm building a house for her, there's going to be, 10 stacks of blueprints.
Oh yeah. Well, I would definitely want some very detailed plans because I would want to figure out exactly what I wanted that house so it would be perfectly optimized and efficient and all the storage and just everything. I'd want to think about where every outlet was because the chair is going to be here and whatever. I mean, I'd want everything perfectly planned
My
out.
house would be
Thank
like
you
a
for-
60 by 100 shop with a finished-in corner.
Yeah.
With a bed and toilets.
Well, I mean, if I was on a budget, I could do that too. But if I was building the house that I really wanted, I would be. I would probably spend more time planning it than I would actually building it.
That's the house you really want.
Well, right there, you got it. Just go out there and
That's
put
why
some
my house
drywall
so
up, and
nice.
yeah.
So, Pastor Wagner, the Lord didn't have a hard time creating the earth, did he?
Oh no, because He's got infinite intelligence and infinite power.
But
And
it's
Infinite wisdom.
But
Yes.
he already has wisdom, and it's like, okay, now it's time for me to take the blueprint out. And I'm like thinking, was that because it was
well, I was using a blueprint as
no?
an example of
Yes, exactly. But that's what I'm saying. It's like, okay, now because sometimes we just do things like when we're skilled at it, just like do it. But when we are doing something complex, then we want to make sure that everything is perfect. But He's already perfect, and He's not going to make mistakes. Nevertheless,
But he doesn't make mistakes because He used wisdom. If He wouldn't have used wisdom and wouldn't have planned it
He will
out
never make
well,
mistakes anyway.
Well, he wouldn't.
That's
That's
the Big
because
Bang
he-
Theory. Magically
Right.
happens.
Well, that's why He doesn't make mistakes, because He uses wisdom. See, people that live by wisdom don't make mistakes. Right? If you perfectly live by wisdom, you wouldn't make any mistakes. That's why He doesn't make it.
Because the Lord does, yes, because He lives by wisdom. But
Right.
with us, we definitely make mistakes.
Oh, right. Right.
All because of lack of wisdom.
That's right. And then wisdom says, when there were no fountains abounding with water. So she says she was brought forth before there were no depths, and when there were no fountains abounding with water, the implication is she was brought forth then too. A fountain is a spring or source of water issuing from the earth and collecting in a basin, natural or artificial. Also the head spring or source of a stream or a river. So a fountain is a source of water, whether it's the head of a river or it's some well or some spring or something at the bottom of the ocean or whatever. It's a source of water issuing from the earth. And fountains of water spring up from the depths below. And I'll just give you a couple of verses. Deuteronomy 8 and verse 7. Deuteronomy 8 and verse 7. It says, for the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of the valleys and hills. So the fountains come from the depths. And we're going to talk about some fountains in some very deep depths here in a minute. Look at Psalm 78 and verse 15. Psalm 78, 15. It says, he clave the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink out of the great depths. So deep down inside the earth, that water's springing out. And then there were these fountains that the Lord created. It was called the fountains of the great deep. They were deep below the surface of the earth, and He created those to be used later to flood the earth and destroy it. Look at Genesis 7 and verse 11. So in God's creation plan, contained within it, He made provision for how He would later destroy it, which is interesting. Kind of like He prepared the lake of fire before the foundation of the world, it says, because He knew what was going to happen and He was going to have a use for it. I remember Conrad saying one time that Satan would have seen the lake of fire created because the angels saw the creation and the foundation of the earth and all that. And when Lucifer looked and said, what's that? God says, you'll find out. That one was for him. Genesis 7 and verse 11. It It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So the fountains of the great deep, so you got these fountains, these springing sources of water that are way down deep in the bottom of the ocean floor. The Lord created those to eventually be broken up, so they would become this enormous fountain. And what science tells us, and I don't know if I'm going to get into this now or am I going to get into it later. I think I might get into it later, but I'll just mention it right now very, very quickly. There's something called the Hydroplate Theory, which theorizes that below the Earth's crust, you had about, I think it was about 10 miles of Earth's crust, and then below there was about 3/4 of a mile of water. And it would have been under extreme pressure, obviously. You think about 10 miles of Earth, pressuring it. When that broke up, and that made a fountain of water springing out of the oceans, or out of land for that matter, I suppose, that's what flooded the Earth. That was the majority of what flooded the Earth, and that water was sprayed way up into the upper atmosphere, frozen, rained back down on Earth at extremely cold temperatures, which explains how the woolly mammoths up in Siberia were frozen standing up. They weren't hit by an asteroid or something, right? If they were hit by some great big thing, it would have smashed them. They were frozen standing up, which makes sense if the waters of the Great Deep sprung way up into the upper atmosphere, froze like next to absolute zero, and then rained back down on them and just covered them up in hail, basically. They would have frozen standing up just like they did.
Doesn't that go with that couple of DVDs that Don had?
I don't know if I saw that. It could have. I don't know if I watched that or not.
Oh, they were pretty good.
Were they? Okay. I don't remember if we... Was that one of the ones we borrowed and it got stuck in my...
Yes.
Oh, maybe that's why I didn't see it. But yeah, and there was a good book written about that too. It was written by a guy named Walt Brown. He was a PhD from MIT. It's called In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood. He talks a lot about that.
So how deep is the lake of fire?
I don't know.
Is it in the center of the earth?
No, hell's in the center of the earth, but I don't think the lake of fire is. Because hell will be cast into the lake of fire.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hell.
Hell is in the center of the earth, because it talks about people going down into hell. Okay. And then hell will be cast into the lake of fire at the final judgment. It's a different place.
But it's hot in